Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Fundraising Academy's September workshop, Fundraising Readiness. We're going to go over 6 essentials for starting a fundraising program. I am Angela Beard. I am the director of the Fundraising Academy at City University of Seattle, which is really a mouthful. And I have quite a bit of experience both in fundraising and in education. You can see it all for yourself there if you wish. And I also want to introduce my guest and colleague, Libbie Stellas, who has also been in fundraising in the Seattle area for quite some time, 25 plus years. Although she looks like she's about 21 years old, so don't let that fool you. Libbie's also got an extensive background in training and consulting and has worked with the several nonprofits in the Seattle area who I'm sure you'll recognize. And she's going to be joining us with a little bit of a personal perspective because she really does specialize in starting or restarting development efforts in organizations. So if we could have the next slide, please, Pujo. Today, my hope and goal for you is to take away how we fundraise before incorporating as a nonprofit, if we choose to do so. The 6 things to have in place before beginning to fundraise, or let's preface all this by saying before beginning to fundraise successfully and legally and well. And then Libbie will talk about some real life examples and apply the theory I'm going to give you to real life situations. And then of course, at the end, we always have a Q&A and there are resources for you on the final slides. Yes, we always do send out the slides. You'll get those within the next couple of days, along with a link to the recording, which we'll have ready as soon as our fabulous Pujo, who's helping us with all the technology, edits and has it ready for viewing. All right, let's roll. Any questions? Oh, as far as questions go, please feel free to type yours into the chat or unmute yourself and ask. I run these pretty informally, as those who have joined us before know. So any questions at any time are welcomed and appreciated. So let's talk first about incorporation. Now we're really again talking about brand new nonprofits or perhaps existing nonprofits who have relied on another source of income and want to diversify their revenue by adding fundraising to their portfolios, okay? But this slide is mostly about what you do before you are incorporated as either a 501c3 with the feds or registered as a nonprofit with the state you're in. I don't know if there is anybody on this call who's not in the state of Washington, but the registration of nonprofits is regulated by the state you are in. All right, you do have to register with their Secretary of State Division of Nonprofit Businesses to raise money in your state. So before all this happens, what do? Get that question a lot. And just a note, and a lot of people don't know this, I actually didn't know this until some time ago, that before you incorporate, you are or can be held personally responsible for how you handle donated money. So if you commingle it with your personal bank account, for example, and somebody gets a little squirrely about that, the buck stops with you. And incorporating as a 501c3 or registering with the state will shield you from some of that liability, okay? You want to be transparent with your donors about your incorporation status. And let me back up to say that one of the primary advantages of incorporating as a 501c3 is that your gifts from donors are tax deductible. Before you are incorporated as a 501c3, they are not. So as a new nonprofit or a nonprofit starting a fundraising operation, you want to be transparent with your donors that you are in the process of applying for 501c3, that their gift is not tax deductible officially until you are approved. Once you are approved, if you are, their gift is tax deductible retroactively to the date of your founding. Okay. If you are not approved, then they don't get a tax deduction. And a lot of donors don't care about this. Some do, and some just maybe take it for granted. And you'll want to be really transparent with your donors or your potential donors about your status there. All right. How do you get money before you're incorporated? Well, you can take gifts as long as you make your donors aware of your status. But most new nonprofits rely on their friends and their family and other potential donors who care about what it is they're doing. So they'll go to their circle and say, look, I want to start an animal shelter. I want to start a program to battle teenage addiction. I've worked with one of those recently. Until I get up and running, will you support me with a gift? You can go to a bank or the Small Business Administration for a more traditional financing method alone. And you can always look for in-kind support, especially when it comes to some of the things you're going to need to set yourself up: lawyers, fundraising consultants, tax folks, people to advise you on your structure, your governance, your financing before you are up and running. Any questions so far on that?
Can I put my 2 cents in here?
Yeah, please do. It's a joint effort.
So in my experience, people that I've worked with in Washington will go and check the state site to see if you're registered as a nonprofit. So that is something to do as soon as you can fill out the forms and do that, and they have questions that they ask you. The federal 501c3 status takes a little longer, and as Angela said, you need to make people aware that yes, you are registered, that's key, and you're working towards your 501c3.
Mm-hmm.
So because that's the kind of out there in the world, people just ask these like, well, are you registered, or do you have whatever. And the other thing about tax deductible is that in the last number of years, this has become less important for a majority of donors because the tax laws have changed, and being able to deduct charitable donations has been quite limited unless it's a huge amount. So just something to be aware of.
Is there anybody out there who is in this stage of pre-incorporation or working on their incorporation? You're gonna hit your raise the hand button if you are, or one of the reactions, smileys or thumbs up or thumbs down. Angry face, that's okay too. Nobody. Okay, well, that's cool. A lot of this is still we'll go on to talk about the other elements after you do incorporate. So if we could have the next slide, Pooja, that'd be awesome. All right, so briefly, and then we'll go over each in a little more depth. The 6 elements of readiness for fundraising are: have a fundraising plan. You need to understand your donor base if you have one. And at least everyone has a tiny donor base, we hope, in that your founders or your new board are donors. You need to understand the need for human capital for raising money. Like I was saying to Libbie when we were preparing for this, the elves do not come in the night and leave money on the table, right? There's a lot of work that's involved, a lot of people that you need to contribute their time or that you can pay for their time. You'll need either expertise in and or access to training and fundraising. And that's obviously one of the things that we do. But you'll need to scan your environment and see who you have. You'll need the capacity to track and thank donors, plus managing the money. And you need to have a case statement, what's called a case for support, that really puts forward your organization and the reason why you are deserving of support. Fundraising plan. And off the cuff, I will say to you quite candidly that I know several established nonprofits that do not have a fundraising plan. So don't panic. Remember, we're talking about what you need to be highly successful and as effective as possible. So a fundraising plan first of all, creates what I call a menu, and those are your needs for funding, your programs, dollars that you're needed to do your work and achieve your goals. All right. How much do you need to raise? After that, you want to attach 1 year goals for each of the income categories you decide to pursue. So, say you ask your board for money and you have a small, um, what I call annual fund donor base, donors that give smaller gifts on an annual basis. Say you think you're eligible for grants or you're going to do an event or whatever you choose, you need to have a goal, a financial goal for each of those categories. Okay. You need to have an agreed upon strategy, and obviously agreed upon by whom is going to differ according to your circumstances, but agreed upon by the staff leadership, the board leadership, and whoever's doing the work for reaching each of those goals. You need a timeline. Either a year is great, 6 months if that's the what you can manage with all the unknowns in place. And then you want to start thinking about the future already. As you build your fundraising operation, you're going to say, all right, what fundraising strategies or techniques could we add, grow, or delete over the next 5 years? So you may have in mind an eventual goal, for example, of a major gift program. And you know that to get there, you need to have a donor base of a certain number of donors who have given for a certain number of years. So they've shown they're loyal and really kind of invested in your mission. So when you're starting, your initial goal might be that small donor base of those folks. And you might say, well, 3 years from now, some of these folks are going to be ready to be asked to step up and increase their giving and support the organization in a major way. Make sense? You might say, today we aren't grant ready, but after 3 years of operation, when we've demonstrated outcomes and we've achieved some things and proved ourselves credible and worthy of grant funding, in 3 years we'll start applying for grants, that kind of thing. Any questions on that? It's never set in stone, and it's also a little bit of a looking into the crystal ball, because does anything ever go the way it's supposed to? No. But without a plan and goals to work towards, you're really going to kind of be treading water. You're going to be dog paddling, right? So that's what the elements of a fundraising plan for a newer fundraising program should include. Questions? How many of y'all have a fundraising plan in place now at your nonprofit? Don't be shy. Anyone? Hands raised. Well, okay. That's why you're here, to learn the basics, right?
Okay,
All
so
right.
Angela, can I make comments here?
Please.
So if you wanted, before we started, a couple of us were talking about wanting to go on a cruise around the world. So if you wanted to do that, I think virtually all of us would need a plan. How we're going to put together the money, the time, the energy to do that. For some, that means I'm going to take a separate job. So if you think of a fundraising plan for your organization as you're getting started, it's really about keeping that goal, the case, and what it's about, why you're doing this in mind, in order to say, well, then what are the steps that we need to take in planning? Like Angela, I have to tell you that many of the nonprofits I work for, even large ones, do not have a particularly well shared fundraising plan. If they've been in as a nonprofit for a longer amount of time, they may have one that just kind of keeps growing, but especially smaller ones, or ones that one that I think of that, it was a women's drug and alcohol treatment center, and they knew, they were like, well, we need to raise money. And so I'm sort of like, well, what are we raising money for? And so those questions were surprising to them. It's like, well, we just want to make sure that we, whatever. And so being able to sit down and think it out not only helps you as a fundraising person, but it particularly helps the board and the organization kind of get real about what service they can do in the world. Because they're like, well, we'll just, if we build it, they will come. Well, if you look at your own economics in your family, it's a tenuous way to live. And presumably a plan that says we're going to do good and avoid evil and have enough money to do that is not helpful to you as a fundraiser or to the organization. And especially because organization people change and leave. So if there's no plan that's ever been created, then no one knows where you are in it and how to continue. So thanks.
There are a lot of resources out there for fundraising planning, and I've posted in the chat our own YouTube playlist, which has a couple of good videos on creating a plan and also working in a small shop, not how not to be freaked out by major gifts. Go ahead and check it out if you want. All right, the next really important element is to understand your donor base. And like I said just a few minutes ago, a lot of folks with new nonprofits say, but we don't have a donor base. And I say, yes, you do. Yes, you do, because you've got your board, you've got the founders at the very beginning. And that's where you start. And those, I'm not going to talk about building a donor base, but every new nonprofit has one. How many donors do you have in each income category? Well, even if it's just 3, okay. How often do they give? How long have they been giving to you? Loyalty is super important. That's going to be a real indicator of who is willing to move to the next level in their giving, who's a potential even board member, or, who really is loyal to you and committed to and excited about your mission. At what level do your donors give? Have they increased their giving in the last 2 or 3 years, or would they respond well to a request to increase their giving? And for your major donors, what are they most interested in? If you have major donors, and you will, if you don't now, you will eventually. So this will, as we talk about some of the other capacities, you need a system, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, to track those donors and what they like and what they most care about in your organization. Questions on this one? Okay, and go ahead
Just
and
one comment on donor base. So if you don't really have, if you have like 10 donors and you're growing, if you consider what is the category of your nonprofit, you can go to Google and find any number of local nonprofits that have sort of a similar thing. And each one of them has to publish in some way an annual report as to who gives and where they get their resources from. And so most of those are published on people's websites. And you can see if a nonprofit has been around for 50 years, that's going to be a big list. But if it's around for 5 years, you can see, well, here are some of the, just to get you an idea of how you would look at a donor base. And maybe some of those people would be interested in your nonprofit.
Yeah. And connecting this to the last slide, when we talked about projecting over 3 to 5 years, one of your goals might be to build your donor base, right? So you think of the strategies and do your Googling and talk to your colleagues in fundraising about how to do that. But you might want to purchase some mailing lists for recipients who fit into the category of what is likely to be a donor to your organization. You might want to do crowdfunding. You might want to do peer-to-peer fundraising. There are strategies that are specifically for building a donor base that might be part of your plan, your fundraising plan that we talked about in the last slide. So carrying on, human capital. And I'm sure you all, Libbie, and all of you attending are with me on understanding that this is the essential element of fundraising, least understood by the public and unfortunately often by our leadership. It takes people to raise money. And the elements that I would suggest, that we would suggest you have in place, are an active fundraising committee on your board that creates and manages fundraising activities. In early stages, you may be an all volunteer organization. So this by de facto will be a board committee because that's who's running the place, right? And in an organization with a staff, this will be a mix of board and staff members. A board of directors that understands asking for money and giving money is a central part of their work. In our YouTube, again, I keep referring you to that, but Libbie just did a fabulous presentation on engaging your board in fundraising. Some organizations are lucky enough to have a board that really gets it and values fundraising, and there's a real strong culture of philanthropy at the place, and others are not so lucky. And if you're one of those, it's not hopeless, but again, we're talking about maximal potential for success. You have a board behind you. Again, on the premise that this is a volunteer run a new nonprofit, we need a dedicated core group of folks who can, on average, can give 2 to 5 hours a month to fundraising tasks. And that is solicitation, cultivation, thanking, especially. We all know, I think stewardship is very, very important. And these are tasks you can assign to board members as well. If you have a bigger board and want to engage them or need help because you have a small staff or whatever the situation is, ask your board members to make thank you calls or, meet a guest at one of your events and cultivate them. And the same applies for the next bullet point. You need a group of at least 25 people who will give 6 or more hours a year for fundraising. And Libbie and I, again, were chatting about this, and this applies across the board, not just to small startups. But I was sharing with Libbie when I was at Seattle Rep, we had a gala committee of 19 people. And they gave much more than 6 hours a year. They probably gave 6 hours a week each. So you do need a lot of human power to get this thing going and keep it going. And I don't think anybody needs any convincing, but it had to be put on this list.
Well, no, but it does, because many of you who are in a nonprofit now who are responsible for fundraising may have been told, or implicitly or explicitly, that it's your job to raise the money. And
Right.
that's impossible. So I've been interviewed a number of times over the years, and people sort of like, and I've asked this question about how involved are other people, and they're like, no, but that's your job. And I'm like, no, I may be the captain and the organizer of that, but the real reason a paid fundraising development person cannot be the sole person is because if they are the sole person, then when they leave or there's a problem, all of the network of people who give goes away. As I've said, if I do all the asking, then people are connected to me rather than the whole organization, and they will leave.
Not only that, but
they will start, and so the more you have people, the board of directors, people involved in asking for money or being a part of it in some way, the more your donors are giving to a cause and an organization, not an individual. And that applies to if there's an executive director who says, well, I'll ask everybody. It's like, it needs to be more broad than that.
Yeah. And if you're thinking about starting fundraising, start it from ground day one. This is the time to make sure that everybody understands that it's a organization-wide endeavor. It's not just the fundraising staff. So hopefully you have the opportunity to put that in place right now. And if not, slowly build it into your organization. Creating a culture of philanthropy, which is what this is all about, doesn't happen overnight, but it can happen. And that's, if you need help with that, you're welcome to contact Libbie or I anytime. Questions on this before we go on? This is the easiest one for staff people to understand and the hardest one for some others to understand. So I think I'm preaching to the choir. We might as well go on to the next slide. Okay, you need expertise and or access to training. And this is can be tough for smaller nonprofits getting off the ground or getting going, because people are experts in and excited about the work. They want to make the world a better place for some group of people or the environment or animals or whatever. And they don't know a lot about fundraising. They might know that it's a necessary thing to do, but they've never done it. They may not be too excited about doing it. Who knows? So you do need people in your organization who have experience, knowledge, and a positive attitude. I want to put, lights around that about fundraising. And if you don't, can you find help through some pro bono assistance, consultants, or training workshops like ours and mentoring? We obviously get paid. I get paid, and Libbie to a lesser extent, but I get paid to teach people to fundraise. I get paid by CityU, not by you. We do it for low cost or no cost. But there are several programs in the area. There's all kinds of resources and videos on the internet. The information is out there. So encourage your folks to take advantage of that. And something that might be helpful is to assess the fundraising level of experience in your organization by this little tiny diagram. The person's name and how many years of experience they have. And I would also say what, have they managed events? Have they written grants? Have they done solicitation, which is rare, but you never know, right? And then you're going to have one of these choices down below. We have lots of experience. Yay. Woohoo. We don't have a lot, but we know who we can ask for help. Okay. We don't have a lot, but we know where to get training and mentoring. Fab. We don't have a lot, but we could raise the money we need to buy help and advice if we need it. So there are options out there, right? You can ask for help, you can pay for help, or you can teach yourself how to do it. Questions on this? Libbie, what do you think?
Meetup is a good place to explore things. When I needed tech support or to teach around tech and nonprofits, I found somebody through a meetup group. So, anything that you can sort of to your friends and family. Hey, do you know anybody?
Yeah.
This is, if you're tied to, I have to do everything by myself, you're probably not going to be successful. It's the best to adopt an attitude of like, everybody wants to help. I just have to ask.
There are a couple of nonprofits I'm going to put in the chat that are specifically for helping smaller nonprofits or consulting. Communities Rising is a nonprofit that specializes in supporting other nonprofits, especially with legal issues. There's Washington nonprofits, I'm typing away, that are, across the board. They put a conference on, they have all kinds of learning opportunities. And then there's 501 Commons. I'm typing all this into the chat. 501 Commons also has a directory of consultants. They have some folks that do pro bono work, and they're across the governance, finance, fundraising, marketing, human relations, IT. They have little cadres, if you will, little stables of experts in all of those fields that sometimes you pay, and I'm not sure what the scale is because I've always been in a nonprofit big enough that I had to pay. But it's not much. It's, far reduced from the market rates. And they also have a lot of free information. So check them out. Tinsel, sit down, please. Am I missing anybody, Libbie? And of course, us, but.
No, yeah, of course, us. Yeah, I think we have to move on.
And we're fabulous. So, okay, moving on to the next slide. Capacity is kind of the infrastructure you need in place. So you're going to need a system that can track the donor's information and giving history. You're also going to need a financial system to be sure that checks are deposited within 3 days of receipt. We need a process for acknowledging gifts and sending thank you notes or letters within 1 to 3 business days. We need to be able to communicate about our programs with our donors. If I could just plead with you all on a little bit of an aside here, please do not consider donors an ATM machine. They need to hear from you other than when you're asking them for money, okay? Other benefits for donors, hi Katie, we if we know our donor base, right? Going back to slide 3, we're going to have some idea of what donors want or expect when we in the relationship with our nonprofit. And then for the major donors, again, we know their specific interests and we work to communicate with them on the phone or in person from 1 to 3 times a year. Am I missing anything, Libbie, or folks in the
No, 2 things I want to mention in the story. So when it says database to track your donors' information, that doesn't mean you have to go out and buy some big software system. You can create an Excel spreadsheet. The main thing is to keep track of information and giving history. And and to then look at it on a regular basis.
Right.
So there's a local nonprofit that I would get a letter once a year, Christmas time, and I would send them $100. And I did that for, I think, 15 years. And I never heard from them except then. And then when I got the form letter thanking me for my gift and the note for the IRS. And so as I got more involved in fundraising, and I really cared about this organization, I met a new development director at a conference, a fundraising conference. And I said, oh, I love your organization. I said, would you be willing to, I'd love to come see you. So we actually set up a time. And I said, you're starting on it. So I want to share with you my experience with your organization. She was very interested. And I said, well, I've been giving this $100 every year. And I noticed that it seems no one's ever tracked that I have this long history of every year giving to you. Because the average donor only gives 3 years and then they go somewhere else. And great part they do that because they're not paid attention to, I think. So we had this whole conversation and I left and I said, I would love to get more involved and all these things. And I have to tell you, I never heard from her again. And quite recently, they just finished a big capital campaign. And I thought to myself, oh, they could have gotten more money because if I can give $100 a year, I could make a pledge for much more than $100 for a capital campaign. But it was a lost opportunity. So little small donors, if you come up with a way to track them and a way to acknowledge them, that's pretty simple. And this is where you get that human, other people helping you. That person can grow into someone who can be quite a substantial giver. When I worked at Special Olympics, there were older people who had given a relatively small amount for 30, 40 years. And they were paid attention to enough that they actually then left Special Olympics in their will, gave to a capital campaign. So those are those kind of things is if we take care of the people who are helping us, they will take care of us. Thanks.
Questions? Okay, I think we're up to our last element. And that is a case statement, a case for support. So every organization and some folks are to a point where they do it for every program needs a case for support. And everyone who's engaged in fundraising needs to have access to it. And a case for support, for those who don't know, is basically outlining your program. It's about what the need is in the community, what problem are you addressing? So hunger or, animals being euthanized or climate change. And then how you address it, which is a description of your program and your organization. how you plan to evaluate your work, how much it's going to cost you, and how you plan to sustain the program if the funding isn't given to you, if it goes away, etc. How are you sustainable? In that, you define your program goals and needs, and so you want to be able to talk about these to donors. We have a goal in our program of addressing childhood hunger, of reducing the current number of kids in West Seattle who go without food at lunchtime from 1 in 6 to 1 in 4 or 5. You got to be realistic, right? And we need X to outfit a food truck and get to those neighborhoods that aren't being served for 3 months. Make sense? We've defined our internal needs, and I think I swore only to go on one tangent, but this is another. Nonprofits have internal needs. You need to spend money to make money. The scarcity mindset of we got to scrape by on old equipment and a falling down building, etc., doesn't do you any good. It's just like self-care as a human, as a person, as an individual. You can't drive a car with an empty tank, right? Well, we can't serve our communities with an empty tank. So you make sure that you have defined your internal needs. What do you need? Do you need a new computer system? Do you need training, like we talked about in fundraising? Equipment? Do we need to purchase a subscription to the foundation directory online? There are all kinds of infrastructure needs that you will have, and you need to be able to talk about these to donors as well. Some of them may be interested in supporting you in that way. And then you need appropriate materials for your solicitation work. And that may be pledge forms, brochures. You may need a printed version of your case statement, especially if you're doing a specific or a larger campaign. Who knows? That will vary by organization, but you need to have something. Am I missing anything about the case statement and supporting materials? Libbie, what do you think?
No, I think that this case statement can be developed in conjunction with all these others, like the fundraising plan. Yeah. Most people think of the case statement as what they need if they're applying for a grant, because they actually ask these questions. So if you have a grant form, but you're not ready to apply, you could use that structure that they ask for to help yourself create this. And mostly a case statement is a combination of why we want to do this and how we want to do it. Yeah. It's those two things. So if you go to YouTube and you put in the search bar, start with why, you'll come up with a gentleman named whose last name is Sanak, who has a wonderful 20-minute video about start with why. And it really is helpful for anyone who wants to be in a nonprofit or start a nonprofit. It's to be able to say why we do it. Most importantly, not how or what we do. We tend to talk about what we do, but not why we do it. And a case statement has to include the why. So for helping children with homelessness, a why has often been like with Fair Start, they work with, every child deserves to sleep inside. That's why they do what they do. Now, how they do it and what they actually do, the little separate things, what they do internally, those are secondary to knowing why you are doing it. So your case statement is kind of the bedrock, and that could take a group of people some time to really develop, and it gets modified. Yeah, and on that note, one of the beautiful things about a good, well-written case statement is that you can use it as a source for a lot of your fundraising materials. Right. You can cut and paste and steal and slightly edit, and you're good to go for your website, for your brochures, for your grant proposals, your direct mail pieces. All kinds of stuff could be built off of this. So
you do a good job once, woohoo, then you've saved yourself a lot of work and repetition down the line.
Right. And you will have something to go back to
Yeah.
every 6 months, every year, and say, is this accurate? Have we gone astray? Are we doing more in this area that we need to be able to tell people? The one thing also I want to say about internal needs, and this is not a nonprofit example, but I think it will make sense to everyone. As scientists and scientific organizations, we're trying to help local health services, so public health people, to get them the right information about COVID or to get them other things. They would try to use systems where they could send, and this was involved in health issues, right? So there were health, the HIPAA kind of stuff. They would want to send things to the local public health folks and electronically. And a lot of public health places around the country couldn't receive them. They could only receive them by fax. Right?
That's right.
And so what happened is then the bigger entities would go, well, we don't have fax machines anymore, so we can't send you a fax. And they're like, well, we don't have the capability to receive your information unless it's by a fax. So many of these organizations, not the final ones, but the bigger ones, they literally had to go out to used places and find fax machines that they could then send this information to these public health entities. And so there's an incredible example of part of the problem of our public health system at the local level. It does not have the internal needs met so that they can function in the world that we function in now. And I think that's true with a lot of nonprofits. They haven't been able to get Windows 360, some update in their software so that they can receive fax material through their software systems. They're like, no, you got to send us a fax. Well, a lot of entities don't have faxes anymore to be able to send them to other people. So that's my new thing that I learned about the pandemic. That was a huge obstacle for getting a lot of things going, because they had this roadblock, and it's thankfully made a lot of people look at the internal needs and equipment that local organizations need, and how to be able to say to entities, no, you have to help us pay for this, because we can't meet our why, and we can't do what we want to do without that work. So,
thank you, Libbie.
yeah.
Questions on this, on the case statement, how to access resources to write one. This is another one all over the internet. So all you got to do is Google how to write a case statement, and you're going to find all kinds of information. And we have videos again in our YouTube that I've done about the 3 main sections of that. So check it out. And now we've kind of interspersed real life examples with the entire presentation. But I know Libbie's prepared a few, particularly addressing some of these elements. So take it away, Libbie.
Yeah, so just a few, and it worked better. I hope that's okay, Angela, that I was sort of weaving them in. When I was, I was the, how do I put this? I was a board president for a local nonprofit, and I learned a lot about what it meant to be part of a team that's involved in fundraising. It was a very active board, and I didn't get on that board initially. It came after I had actually done a training with them. And in that training, we talked about the board's role in fundraising. And so I said to them, I asked them, would you please think about whether all of you on this board have made a financial gift to this organization? I didn't want to out anybody. And I said, in order for me to tell you how important this is, I actually wrote out a check, a fairly small one, but I wrote out a check and said, here's my donation, because what I'm telling you matters so much that I want you to see me give as well, because all we have to give in this life is time, talent, and treasure. Those three things. I mean, we give love, but that's connected to some of these, and we, but time, talent, and treasure are the things that are available to us to share in the world easily. Time is needed for board members, for volunteers, for people who are going to be a part of your endeavor. Talent is needed because not any warm body will do as a volunteer. So for a board member, if you had somebody who knew something about Excel, that's a talent they could bring to you, right? Or someone who's very good at organizing or getting in-kind gifts, and you knew that. That's a talent that they have. The last is treasure. And treasure is what we decide treasure in terms of finances is. I've never been so interested with boards or in giving into the amount, but that they actually give. And the main reason is because, as Angela has pointed out, this is a group endeavor. Fundraising is not something that just happens with one person. And so if a board member or another volunteer is going to be making an ask, even if it's to write a mail appeal, if they want to always be able to know that they gave first, because the worst thing that can happen is if you're meeting with someone and you ask them to make a gift, and let's say there's a range, and the person says, well, what did you give?
And they will.
They do it often. And you say, well, I give my time and effort. And that person then says, okay, well, that's what I'll do. I'll give you my time. Because we as involved in this why, this thing that's so important to us, need to have something in the game. Now, I'm not saying it had to be $100, $500. It's something that you can honestly say means that. And if you're starting a nonprofit and you have the initial people there, one of the ways to use as a guideline for how much money you should give in, or if you're going to make a bigger gift, what I tell people is to think of a gift that you would need to talk to your spouse, partner, or family about before you made it. And that's kind of like a lot of people say, well, if they're married, they say, well, neither one of us spends $100 unless we tell the other one. There's some that your family or your entity has some guideline which says up to this point, you can make a purchase, whatever. But when it gets to be a purchase of a certain amount, that's something you're going to talk to the family about. And that's a way to help people start thinking about their investment in this organization. And that may be that, in your family, nobody goes to Starbucks unless everybody agrees that, yes, we're all going to go to Starbucks. So it could be a small gift for the nonprofit, a large cost, because, Starbucks costs more and more. But so it's not so much the amount, it's the attitude we have towards this gift, that it's important to us and how we decide that. And with that organization, one of the things that happened was after that meeting where I made my donation, come to find out later that half the board had not given any money. And that actually is what got them to give money. And then a year or so later, I went on the board, and then I became the board president and continued that we have to have a stake in this. It matters to us. And one of the ways, especially in American society, that we show that is that we give money,
right,
not just time and talent. And those other things are very important too. Boards often ask me, will I give my talent of fundraising to their board? And I don't in general, because their why is not my why. Right? I love their whys, but it's not the thing that's going to move me into that setting. I have on times that organization, I got very involved because their why and what they were doing was so important to me as well. So a lawyer isn't going to come on your board just because they're a lawyer. A finance person isn't going to just, so you don't want to just say, oh, I got to find somebody who knows finance. You got to find the people that are connected to your why and the way in which you want to achieve that why and what you want to do. And then say, oh, and by the way, are you any good with Excel? Because we need some help with that. Because Lord knows if I had an organization, that's what I would need. So I think that's enough. I want to see if there's any questions that, people have just anything that they, simple question or whatever. And you can put it in chat or they can unmute themselves. I think.
Feel free.
Yeah.
What are some of the next steps you're going to take? What's one next step you're going to take after hearing this? Anyone want to share?
Jacqueline, Edward, I think they're the only two. No, Shannon's on.
Shannon. Hi, Shannon.
Hi there.
How you doing?
Great, super helpful. Thank you so much. One thing I'm going to do, and I was just creating this as we were talking, is a list of fundraising tips for my peer-to-peer fundraisers. So I was able to pull a lot of great tips from your presentation. So
There's
thank
some
you.
Good, if you want publications to help you, there's some good ones out there. I think Campbell and Company did one a couple of years ago for one of the first Giving Tuesdays, just in case it's helpful.
And Angela, could you give a quick definition of what peer-to-peer fundraising?
Peer-to-peer fundraising is similar. If any of you are old like me, you remember doing AIDS walks or a bowling thing where you got sponsors, right? You went to all your friends and family and asked them to sponsor you for 10 cents a mile.
Right.
Peer-to-peer is the same concept, only it's online. So a nonprofit has a platform that you are the team leader, if you will, and you engage your friends and family and contacts in raising money by personal emails. I really support this nonprofit. Will you give to X cause or Y? It might be a general one or for a specific program, for example. Give Big has a huge peer-to-peer component. I'm sure Giving Tuesday. What is your peer-to-peer for, Shannon? Is it a general appeal or a specific program?
Yeah, it's for our fall campaign.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's more of a mission ask, just the, continuation of our work, which is still in high demand because of the pandemic.
Well, one thing I want to point out about peer-to-peer, because I used to do it the old way that Angela did, is to really pay attention to that why. So when I was 43 years old, I ran a marathon.
Oh my God. Did you really?
Yeah. Through leukemia, right? Through leukemia, the Leukemia Society. My father died of lymphoma when he was 43 years old. So that was my introduction to my letter to people.
Right.
And it was the why, because, I'm going to get choked up, because I was alive and healthy enough to run a marathon, or well, actually to finish a marathon. I didn't run it all. And he didn't, and he couldn't. And I know that had a big part of why people responded. It's because I started with the why. Then I connected them with lymphoma, Leukemia and Lymphoma Society and all of those kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was, and many of those people knew, or they didn't know, or they forgot that my father had died when he was that young, and that I was 12 years old, and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's one of the key tips I would use with peer-to-peer is,
why does it matter to you?
Yeah, why does it matter to me to raise this money?
I mean, I've done the same as Libbie. I love animals, and most of my friends have met my pets. And for example, I lost my mother to ALS. So when I fundraised through the ALS Society, I say, you guys remember what I went through with my mom? Research for this disease is going to keep other folks from having to go through that. Would you please give? And they step up. And
Mhm.
making it personal like that really helps.
Yeah.
One thing about peer-to-peer, Jacqueline, you're saying about trying it, do some, the internet might want to throw lots of ads at you for some pretty expensive platforms that you need to support all the emailing and the tracking and all that kind of thing. There are ways to do it without that. Give Big maintains their peer-to-peer year round, so check them out. And also giving through Facebook. If Facebook doesn't charge fees for their donation drives, if you will, is not a bad idea. So don't be discouraged if you come across some big multi-thousand-dollar ad that says you must buy us to do good peer-to-peer. No, there are other ways to do it. Happy to
And you could actually like send people real letters with handwritten envelopes and shock them
yeah,
shock them when they read it, and maybe have a link in there how they can make a donation through Venmo or or something else like that. So because you'd be astounded at how people respond to a real letter. They're just like, what? So.
other questions before we kind of
Yeah,
wrap it up?
It's Ed Flash, and I have a question for you.
Sure.
So I have a board member that is pretty adamant that giving financially should not be a requirement of being on the board. How do you deal with that?
How long have they been on the board?
Yeah, there's a number of ways. Libby, you go first.
So they've been on the board. So we're a brand new. Well, we incorporated last year.
Mhm.
We've been around for several years, and he's one of the kind of founding members of the organization.
Okay, well, so I would, you have to understand somebody, right? So I would sit down with them and say, tell me more about how you see this.
Right.
And can I share with you the value of why the board needs to be, and if this board is if this organization or this board is at all connected in any way to a Christian framework, the idea of time, talent, and treasure, comes from the New Testament. I say it applies to everything, but you could, and so sometimes boards, when that's a problem, they go with get or give, right? So if he's like, I'm not going to give my money, but I will commit to getting X amount of money for the organization. If they're not committed to any of this, then you have to say, we have to raise money. So how do you think we're going to do this if we're not all in this together? And how do you think it would be for you to ask somebody for money if you have not given yourself? And then on our YouTube channel, there is a whole workshop that's on YouTube about working with your board about fundraising. So check that out.
Supercharge your board. Also, I've found in the past that having another board ally can be very helpful.
Right.
Someone who does give and is very committed to giving and understands that role. And sometimes you have to, I was executive director, have to take the ally board member aside and say, look, I'm having trouble with board member X, not thinking that, and this was somebody who was very vocal too. So it was kind of bringing down the morale for giving on the whole board, right? So I had to take the board ally aside and say, can you have a word with board member X and talk about, and this obviously the person gave too, right? Talk about the importance of giving and, at a minimum, stop them from denigrating giving in front of the whole board.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, because the board members, if you think logically in terms of the board members are peers to each other.
Right, exactly.
So a staff person is below a board member.
And even the executive director, they didn't want to hear it from me. Yeah.
Right, because the executive director is hired and fired by the board. So
Right.
in some ways, the executive director is below the board. So if you get someone who can be a peer board to board member, to take them quiet, someplace else, go out to lunch or whatever, to talk to them about that, why they see that as so important.
There's also a really good book that I shared with my board. I'm trying to find it because it's not on Amazon, believe it or not. That's called "It's Not About the Money," and it's about hour and a half read that describes short chapter by short chapter why it's important for board members to give. I'm trying to find it now, but I'm not having any luck. It's on my bookshelf. Hold on just a minute. Hold on.
Are some of those ideas helpful, Edward?
Yeah. Thank you, appreciate it.
And not unusual. But it's very frustrating when someone becomes quite vocal about it.
Yeah.
But
It kind of,
something else is going, there's some listening that has to happen. Something else is, what is going on for that person?
yeah, and to be perfectly honest, I don't mind if they keep it to themselves, but when it becomes a outside issue, then that bothers me.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. It's not, now raise it up over your eyes. Yeah.
It's Not About the Money by Jeff Schreifus and Richard Perry. And there's a lot of good information in here about the board issue, building a culture of philanthropy. It's a very, very short read. I mean,
Okay.
I think like I said, I read it in an hour and a half. So, and I shared it with board members. I actually bought copies for some of them. So, do with that what you will.
You might do that. It might be, you could have a book club with the board.
Yeah, and you said that's not available on Amazon, or it is?
I couldn't find it, but I did a really quick search.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Because that's a great way, like at a board retreat or a board meeting where you're just like gonna get to know it, work together or whatever. You don't have like the business.
Yeah.
The board can be brought around. It's not hopeless. I mean, the best way I found of doing that was figure out why each board member cares about your organization. Usually it's some personal experience. They know somebody who's had cancer or leukemia or whatever, and talk to them about the programs that address that. Like my cancer organization, I would talk to the board members about the programs that we had in place, and most of them, if not all of them, wanted to be able to do more. And so the anti-fundraising ones, I would try to get into a conversation about their favorite program, the one that they're really passionate about, and say, Bill, if we had, $50,000 more a year, what do you think we could do with that? I'm leading the horse to water, right? And eyes would light up and they'd be like, oh, we could do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, yeah, and wouldn't that be exciting? And the way we're going to do that is by raising more money. It helped with some folks.
Yeah, so connect them to something.
Yeah. Here's your
And
why, like Libbie was talking about.
right. One other thing, Edward, is going forward, and this, might be a goal for you, and it is to look at the job description for a board member.
Yeah.
And get to a place where it is a requirement of the board, so that going forward, you can head off this happening again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you recommend adding fundraising or adding giving as a?
Well, that's what a board would have to decide. I would say fundraising for absolutely.
Yeah.
You could go as small as giving and getting, or you say everyone needs to make a financial gift to this organization to commit to our why and how we do this. And that gift should be commensurate with a gift that they would only consider giving if they talk to their family about. And that, so you're not setting an amount. I think you get, Children's Hospital, it's $25,000 a year. It's just, that's what it is. But most of us are never going to be in those kind of organizations. So,
Okay.
All right. So I think we need to leave with folks. Or Shannon, got anything else you want?
Just a couple more slides. As always, there's another program in October that I think y'all would be interested in so much that I put in a slide in about it. It's Elizabeth Ralston, who is an expert on accessibility. Elizabeth is hearing impaired herself and is going to come and speak with us about putting accessibility into events. And then we always have a resource slide. There are a couple of websites here that I put about when to start fundraising, and what you need to be ready in assessment. And then my information on a contact, and I think somehow we won't discuss why this is not correct, but I will make sure that the correct one with Libbie's contact information gets to you. We'll send that along with the video link. Thank
Yeah,
you for joining us.
yeah.
Hope
Thanks,
to see you in
everybody.
October, and feel free to reach out with questions of any kind. If you need help, need something to bounce, somebody to bounce ideas off, well, that's why we get the big bucks.
Yeah. All
So
right. Thanks, everybody.
thanks for joining us.